By the middle of the 18th century, Boston was no longer just a colonial outpost. It had breathed, grown, and transformed into one of the most vital nerves of the British Empire in North America. A crowded, salt-aired port shaped by the relentless tides of trade, the weight of imperial power, and a slow-burning tension that would soon ignite a continent. In this video, we aren't just looking at history through the static lens of old textbooks. I'm using modern AI tools, from depth mapping to motion brushes, to breathe life into historic paintings and engravings. We are shifting perspectives and moving through these scenes in ways their original artists could have only imagined. Our goal is to step into the past, to walk the muddy roads of a young Boston and feel the gravity of the decisions made on these very corners. If you stay with me until the end, we'll see exactly how these historic sites have survived the centuries, comparing the echoes of the 1700s to the bustling city of today. To understand the revolution, we must first understand the foundation. This image captures the arrival of the Winthrop fleet in 1630. Led by John Winthrop aboard the Arbella, nearly 1,000 settlers crossed the Atlantic with a singular, daunting vision. Winthrop famously declared they would build a city upon a hill, a shining beacon of Puritan virtue that the rest of the world would watch. But why here? The settlers chose this specific stretch of land, the Shawmut Peninsula, for two critical reasons: its defensible position, and most importantly, a spring of fresh, clean water. At the time, Boston was almost an island, connected to the mainland by only a narrow neck of land that would disappear during high tide. It was a fragile, isolated experiment in a vast, unknown world. By 1632, the heartbeat of this experiment was found here, Boston's first meeting house. This engraving, though created later, captures the essence of early colonial life. It was simple, functional, and unadorned. This wasn't just a church. It was the town hall, the courthouse, and the social center. It stood near what we now know as State Street, in the very heart of modern downtown Boston. It's remarkable to realize that even after 400 years, the skeletal layout of the city, its winding streets and central hubs, still aligns almost perfectly with the paths trodden by those first settlers. They weren't just building houses, they were unintentionally sketching the blueprint of an American metropolis. In these early years, life moved at a fragile pace. Ships were the only lifeline to the old world, and every winter was a test of survival. But as the 1700s approached, this quiet settlement was about to wake up and become a powerhouse of the Atlantic. By the 1720s, the fragile settlement of the previous century had vanished. In its place stood a powerhouse of the Atlantic world. Boston's identity was now inextricably tied to the sea, and the harbor became the engine of its booming economy. This wasn't just a port, it was a global crossroads. The crowning jewel of this waterfront was Long Wharf. Stretching over half a mile into the harbor, it was a staggering feat of engineering for its time. Unlike other piers, Long Wharf functioned like an artificial street extending into the ocean, lined with warehouses and shops. It was here that the triangular trade came to life. From these docks, massive quantities of New England timber and dried cod were shipped out, while ships from the Caribbean arrived laden with sugar and molasses, the raw ingredients for Boston's infamous rum distilleries. But navigating this wealth into the harbor was a treacherous task. To guide weary sailors home, Boston Light was completed in 1716 on Little Brewster Island. It was the first lighthouse ever built in what would become the United States. For a sailor, after months at sea, that flickering flame was the first sign of hope, the promise of land and opportunity. Yet, this symbol of guidance would eventually fall victim to the fires of war. In 1776, as British forces were forced to evacuate Boston, they chose to destroy the original tower rather than let it serve the American rebels. It would be rebuilt in 1783. And remarkably, A lighthouse still stands on that same rock today, guiding vessels just as it did 3 centuries ago. If Long Wharf was the heart of the city, Castle William was its shield and its leash. Perched on Castle Island, this formidable fort guarded the narrowest approach to the town. For any ship entering the harbour, the sight of its heavy cannons was a sobering reminder that Boston was a place watched, defended, and firmly under the thumb of the British Crown. Castle William wasn't just about protection from foreign invaders. It was a constant projection of imperial power over the colonists themselves. In this era, the harbour was a landscape of duality. It represented the immense wealth and freedom offered by global trade, but it was also framed by the rigid authority of an empire that was beginning to tighten its grip. To understand why Boston would eventually explode into revolution, one must first understand this tension between the prosperity on the docks and the cannons on the island. Leaving the busy docks behind, we step onto land just across the river in Cambridge, a town already inextricably linked to Boston's future. In the mid-1700s, this was the heart of Harvard College. Long before it became a global titan of education, Harvard was a modest but vital center of learning, founded to train the clergy and civic leaders who would navigate the destiny of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. In this view, 3 early buildings define the college yard. On the left stands Harvard Hall, the center of instruction. At the center is Stoughton Hall, providing much-needed housing as the college expanded. But look to the right. This is Massachusetts Hall. Completed in 1720, it is the oldest surviving building at Harvard and one of the oldest academic structures in America. It is strange to think how ordinary this place must have felt to the students of that time. They walked these grounds, debated philosophy, and studied law, unaware that they were the earliest roots of what we now call the American dream. It was here, in these quiet halls, that the intellectual seeds of independence began to brew. If Harvard was where the mind of the revolution was formed, the old State House was where its heart began to beat and where it first collided with British authority. Built in 1713, this was the seat of colonial government. It was the most important public building in town, a place where royal laws were debated, taxes were imposed, and British authority was strictly enforced. Architecture is often a language of power. The old State House, with its grand brickwork and royal emblems, was designed to inspire awe and obedience. From its balcony, official proclamations from the king were read aloud to the crowds gathered in the street below. Yet, inside these very walls, the friction was growing. The laws passed here, and the taxes demanded here, would eventually turn this center of order into a stage for history. Standing today in the heart of the modern financial district, the old State House remains a rare survivor, a quiet witness to the moment when a city decided it could no longer be ruled from across an ocean. It is a striking juxtaposition. A small brick building that once held the weight of an empire, now surrounded by the glass towers of a nation it helped create. But before the celebration of independence could begin, Boston had to face the mounting tension in its own backyard. By the late 1760s, the atmosphere in Boston had turned heavy. To see this shift, one only had to look at the Boston Common. For over a century, this had been the city's shared pasture, a place for grazing livestock and quiet leisure. But now, it was scarred by the machinery of war. British redcoats drilled here daily, their bright uniforms a constant, jarring reminder of an imperial presence that felt more like an occupation than protection. Imagine the friction. Ordinary townspeople going about their chores, children playing, all under the watchful, bayonet-tipped gaze of a professional army. In this shared space, everyday life and growing resentment lived side by side. While the British drilled in the sun, the revolution was being plotted in the shadows. This is the Green Dragon Tavern. It was the unofficial headquarters of the resistance. Inside these smoky rooms, the social barriers of the 18th century began to dissolve. You would find silversmiths like Paul Revere sitting across from political heavyweights like Samuel Adams and Joseph Warren. It was here that the Sons of Liberty coordinated their responses to British taxes. In spaces like this, the revolution didn't begin with grand speeches. It started with whispers, clandestine meetings, and the shared anger of men who felt the old order was no longer working for them. That anger eventually spilled over the docks on a freezing December night in 1773. The event we now call the Boston Tea Party was not a spontaneous riot. It was a calculated act of political theater. Disguising themselves as Mohawk Indians was a deliberate choice. It was a way to conceal their identities. Yes, but it was also a symbolic statement. They were no longer acting as British subjects. They were identifying as something distinctly American. In the quiet of the harbor, with hundreds of spectators watching in silence from the shore, they sent a message to the king that could not be ignored. It was a moment of no return, pushing Boston from peaceful protest into open defiance. If the Green Dragon was the secret heart of the movement, Faneuil Hall was its public voice. Often called the Cradle of Liberty, this building served as Boston's central marketplace on the ground floor. But upstairs, the Great Hall became a pressure cooker of democracy. Here, the town meetings took place, gatherings, where dockworkers and merchants stood shoulder to shoulder, packing the room to debate taxes and representation. Faneuil Hall was where public opinion was forged in the heat of passion. It was where frustration was channeled into organized action, and where the radical idea of self-governance moved from private conversations into the very streets of Boston. By 1775, the air in this hall didn't just smell of trade, it smelled of revolution. As the tension of the 1770s reached its breaking point, the focus shifted to the North End, to the towering spire of Christ Church, known to us today as the Old North Church. Built in 1723, for decades, it was simply a place of routine and worship for the local Anglican community. But on the night of the 18th of April 1775, this quiet landmark was pulled into the center of a storm. From this very tower, a simple signal was sent. 2 lanterns hung briefly to warn Paul Revere and the waiting riders across the river that British troops were moving by sea. In that moment, the church was no longer just a building. It became a lighthouse for the revolution. It's a powerful reminder of how, in times of crisis, the most familiar parts of our everyday landscape can suddenly become the most significant stages for history. Fast forward to 1789. The smoke of the battlefield had cleared, and the uncertainty of the revolution had given way to the birth of a nation. To welcome George Washington as the first president of the newly independent United States, the people of Boston erected a grand triumphal arch. Though it was built of wood, it was meticulously finished to resemble solid stone, a perfect metaphor for the country itself. New, perhaps fragile in its foundation, but projecting an image of permanence and strength to the world. Only a few years earlier, these same streets were filled with protest and the boots of an occupying army. Now, they were dressed for celebration. For the citizens standing there, Washington's visit was more than just a parade. It was the living proof that the struggle had led somewhere. They were no longer colonies fighting to become something, they were something. A sovereign people, part of an entirely new experiment in democracy. As Washington passed through that arch, Boston wasn't just looking back at its victory. It was stepping firmly into its future as an American city. Now, I want to bring you back into the present to walk these same streets and see how the echoes of the 1700s still vibrate within the city we know today. It is a journey of layers, where the past doesn't just disappear, but serves as the foundation for everything built on top of it. We begin where the story did. What started as a simple wooden meeting house at the edge of a fragile settlement is now State Street, one of Boston's busiest financial corridors. There is no visible trace of that first gathering place. Yet the very curve of the road still follows the path laid down 4 centuries ago. The harbour, once a low-profile port of masts and wooden docks, has been transformed. The shoreline has been filled and pushed back, replaced by a modern skyline. Yet, the harbour remains the city's heart, and the footprint of Long Wharf still guides travellers toward the Atlantic, just as it did for the merchants of the 1720s. At the harbour's entrance, Boston Light stands as a rare constant. Though the original was lost to war, the structure standing today on Little Brewster Island has been guiding vessels for nearly 250 years, making it the oldest continually used lighthouse site in the nation. In Cambridge, Massachusetts Hall remains an anchor. Built in 1720, it survived the Revolution and countless generations of change. Today, it stands not as a museum, but as a living part of Harvard University, the oldest building still in use on campus. The old State House and Faneuil Hall perhaps tell the story best. Once the tallest and most imposing structures in town, they are now surrounded by the giants of a modern metropolis. They sit quietly in the middle of the rush, witnessing how the streets where a revolution was born have become the stage for a new century. The Old North Church still rises above the North End, watching over the same neighborhood where those lanterns once signaled a change in the course of human history. Standing here now, you realize that history isn't just something we look back on, it's something we walk through every single day. I really appreciate you joining me on this journey through time. Using these AI tools to bridge the gap between then and now helps us remember that the people of 1776 were just as real, and their streets just as busy as ours are today. If you have a city or a moment in history you'd like to see brought to life, share your ideas in the comments below. Until next time,